Well, good morning. How are we? Friday morning. It's got a Friday morning feel to it, hasn't it? The final day of AusCERT 2016. Let me run through a couple of bits of housekeeping before kicking off our speaking program for this morning. Last chance, of course, this morning to get around to the booths, scan the QR codes to enter the passport competition. The prizes from the AusCERT and exhibitor passports will be presented at 1:15 on the mini stage in the exhibition area, and you have to be there to win. You need to be present at the draw. The speed debate's how we lock it all up this afternoon. If you haven't been to AusCERT before, it's one of the highlights of AusCERT. 1:45 sharp we'll start to close out the conference, so make sure you're here a few minutes before that. Check out from the hotel, the Marriott here, 11 a.m. You can leave your luggage with concierge. We've got a morning tea coming up at 10:15, which might be the time to do that. And there are airport transfers today departing at 3 o'clock. We've pulled the 3:30 bus forward to 3. We're pretty sure we've told pretty much everyone who's booked on that 3:30 bus, but if you're on the 3:30 bus, you're not anymore because it doesn't exist. It's now leaving at 3 o'clock to Gold Coast and Brisbane airports. You can still go along to the registration desk if you're not down for any of those buses, but they're now all leaving at 3. Let's meet our final morning keynote speaker. In emceeing my fair share of technology and IT conferences over the last few years, I've heard a lot about AI. I've seen Watson win Jeopardy. I've watched smart systems try and beat the Turing test. I even checked out the legendary Move 37 that Google's Go playing system deployed in beating the best human player of the ancient Oriental board game. If you haven't checked it out, hop online. You haven't lived until you've seen a group of Go playing geeks choking over their cornflakes about a single move that a computer did in a game. Whew, exciting stuff. Anyway, but I've never heard of AI spoken quite the way our next speaker does in his presentation abstract when he says, as AI both advances and becomes more complex, with a dearth of experts who understand and operate it, we are rapidly approaching an era that will enable IT people and their screw-ups to ruin lives on an unprecedented scale. Here to examine AI as an amplifier of human failings, from Cosive, Kayne Naughton.
Thank you. Crazy. Cheers, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I like the banners when I use AI to become the world emperor. I think you'll see a lot more of these. So, might get a little bit serious this morning, but hopefully not too serious for you all. If you're hungover, I apologise, but there won't be any loud noises, so that should be okay. So, just about the topic, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. It's a story written by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. He wrote it in 1797. Those of you who've seen Disney's Fantasia will be familiar with, the walking brooms. But there's a little bit more to it than that. It was written and heavily influenced at the time by the Industrial Revolution. This is around the time that the Luddites were around, what we used to refer now to people who were like all chicken little about technology. But at the time, they were independent weavers who were being replaced by machines by factories full of automated machines. We don't hear a lot about it nowadays, but the swing riots also occurred in northern England with the mechanical threshing machines that were displacing a lot of people working on farms. Goethe is also famous for Faust. If you've heard of the Faustian bargain, where someone trades their morality for knowledge and power for a short-term gain, but ultimately gives up their essence of what makes them themselves. He's also interesting. He would fit in very well in our current media culture. He was effectively mixed up and mashed up into all sorts of musical works. I think he's the guy who invented the director's cut. Like, George Lucas has nothing on this guy. He re-released some of his plays like 7 times because he didn't like what he'd done a couple of years before. It's all very, very modern. In terms of what AI is, when I say AI, I'm really talking about machine learning ultimately. Effectively what we're thinking of is a neural network. It's something approximately like this. Ironically, we call it a neural network, named after the neurons in our brain. We don't actually know how those work yet, so a little bit of hubris in itself. But the concept being, we've got the neurons, the synapses, joining them all together. We have inputs, we have hidden layers, which is just a bunch of things all interconnected. and then we'll have like a final layer, and then effectively what the output is. If you want to know about artificial intelligence and neural networks, that web address there is awesome. I learned all this stuff from first principles with a lot of maths, and it's really, really hard. This guy does it a lot more easily, more practically. I could have saved a lot of relearning how to do, dot products of matrices and stuff had I seen this earlier. No maths today, by the way, so you're welcome. A neuron. So the neurons in this, the methods differ, but effectively it's something that we call a sigmoid function, named after the sigma shape or the S shape. I'll do you a favour. Don't do a Google image search for the name sigmoid. It's also the lower part of the colon. All sorts of really bad things happen to it, not while you're eating your breakfast. Just take my word, it's S-shaped and move on with your life. Generally, the idea is that you'll have like two things in, and depending on either the difference between them, the combination of them or whatever, there'll be a different Y value. Typically, in a simplistic case, like an O or a 1. Is it a true or a false? Should I play golf today? If the weather's this and the rain's that, then yes, it's a good day for golf, otherwise it's not. There's a lot of algorithms, they're largely chosen at random by people. Ultimately, what a machine learning algorithm is trying to do is produce a line of best fit. You've got one thing like shoe purchases by men or shoe purchases by women. You've got these multiple points in a plane, and you're trying to do a line of best fit between them. That's all effectively machine learning is. So the way we hear it, it's very complicated, it's very convoluted, I'll talk a bit more about it later, but culturally we see it one way. Realistically, it's a bunch of math functions just smushed together, and it says like yes or no based on the way that some very basic functions spat out into each other. Not that hard. The cost. The cost is the interesting thing. When you're doing a neural network, it basically jiggles a bunch of weighting factors around until a cost function is good, which is good. Like if say you're doing a pumpkin trebuchet, you want to shoot a pumpkin across the field and you want to hit a target with it. The cost is how far away from your target are you. It's pretty easy. And we're talking any sort of Euclidean thing, it's fine, or lawn bowls for that matter. But when you're talking like customer engagement or detecting cancer or trying to do these really hard things, determining a cost function is very difficult. And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for us going forward is when we do machine learning or eventually get to AI, like what is the goal? What is the target? How do we define what we really want out of things? We as humans have a very intrinsic understanding of the problem we're facing, but we generally can't explain it very well. There's a concept of supervised versus unsupervised learning. Supervised is when you have pre-classified things, and that's a large focus of my talk today. You have to tell the AI, this is an apple, this is an orange, and then it can learn how to differentiate between the two. There's also unsupervised learning where it's just like what stands out, what's different. I'll talk about why that's a real problem. So when we're talking cost, you don't know, like this is like a graph of what cost may look like. You don't know what the graph looks like. You're just trying various things and saying, oh, is this better or worse than last time? But you may find yourself like, it's like, ooh, if I'm over there around 24, if I go like 24.2, that's way better. But you don't realise you're in what's called a local minima. So depending on how you set things up, you can get what's a right answer, but it's actually a wrong answer. It's all about what we call exploration versus exploitation. Now, we as a society, particularly in our mass media, have a fantastic skill at lying to ourselves through math. Artificial intelligence gives us a far greater opportunity to do this. I've definitely proven to myself, you can take whatever stupid idea you've got, if you get enough stupid data for it, you can find a neural networking model that will tell you you're correct. It does not represent the real world, but whatever you feed it, it'll make something that works. And it's much like this here from the Spurious Correlations website. People who drowned after falling out of a fishing boat correlates very closely to the marriage rate in Kentucky. There's a 95% correlation rate, which is far better than every academic paper I've ever seen on AI in terms of its rate of correlation. You should always bear that in mind when you read in the paper, oh, the most amazing AI seen to man. I've seen some where they brag that they managed to get from like 70% 70% to 75% accuracy. If I flip a coin, I've got 50% accuracy. So they're doing better than a coin, but yeah, we really have to be careful when we measure this hype because it's something that will definitely impact our society and is impacting our society right now. There's also what's really cool, recurrent neural networks, where you don't even have to really structure your data. You just go, here's a fire hose of stuff, and like a guy gave it guitar tabs. The computer doesn't understand anything about music, so it's just, here's a bunch of lines with numbers on them, and it wrote songs. The songs weren't very good, what do you expect? But you can use a neural network to understand almost anything in a convincing manner to a human where you go, I don't quite get the result, but it seems to know what it's talking about. One of the basic tasks that we quite often see, the MNIST digits. So it's a bunch of handwritten digits, and we teach computers how to identify what they are. Now, the other thing we use is irises, like as in the flower. But these are represented, is scanned in by 28 by 28 pixels. Which, when you multiply them out, that's like 768 points. The computer doesn't see like the sweep of a pen on the paper. It sees a bunch of independent points that are effectively a 768 dimensional object. Like, you don't know, we have a real tendency to anthropomorphize things. We think that things are thinking like we do. We think that, a dog is happy because of the way it greets us when it comes home, and a lot of people have a problem with this with like apes and chimps in the wild because they smile at them and they go in for a hug and then they tear their face off. We see things in nature and we identify the characteristics of humans as part of that. It's not a safe way of thinking about AI, in my view. If you think about it, like an interdimensional anemone just wiggling its tendrils in a bunch of different planes to try and find something that feels right, that is what AI is doing. It's not like a person sitting there scratching its head, puzzling it out. I honestly don't know whether a Blade Runner style replicant or a interdimensional I don't even know why I put this word in here, I can't say it. Anemone is more scary. Anemone. I got it now. Woo. But yeah, we really don't understand the problems we're solving when we give it to AI, so how do we assess whether it's doing a good job? Anyway, we're getting towards the end of what AI is. When we have a lot of dimensions, we end up projecting them onto a flatter plane. It's much like if you take a 3D drawing and you show it in 2D. You've got the ways of drawing the lines, so everyone sort of can picture in their head what it looks like. But when you're talking, above 17 dimensions, things get a bit weird and fuzzy, even for the AI. This is a really interesting artwork called Self-Imposed Misery, where it's a bunch of garbage in a line, and when the light is shone from the right direction, it looks like a silhouette of a person. That's effectively what we're doing when we do most AI models, because if you put way too much data in, it just gives you even more junk. But it's effectively like holding up a piece of cardboard. The problem is that we can flex that cardboard to get a bit more shadow of certain parts or others. So we also have a way of our own biases can be projected into the way that the AI understands the world. Now, this is quite an interesting and I guess a more visual example of some AI. This is an algorithm called neuroevolution of augmented topologies, or we wanted to find a way of calling something neat and needed something for it to stand for. A YouTuber called Seth Bling did it. He's a Mario speedrunner. He's not a machine learning expert, but he managed to implement this. And this is a neural network, which you can see at the top, playing Super Mario World 1. Did a decent job. And that's pretty cool. It understands Mario. It's really good at World 1, Level 1. As you'll see in a moment, it's really not very good at Level 2. You'll also see, you can see the buttons it's pressing. It just mashes down like a mad bastard, hoping at some point that it will do something useful. You'll notice at no time in the video did it actually go down a pipe. Oh, there he goes, he crashed. At no time did he go down a pipe. Just one of the good events that he saw involved him hitting the down button. So he's like, down button's good, I'm just gonna go with down button. You also notice he never uses the hold down B to run fast, just because he never held down things in the right combination to understand it. I think calling it a he, it's not a he, it's a computer, but we have a tendency in our mind to attribute human behavior when we're looking at these things. This one's interesting because it basically structures a neural network randomly to work out what comes out best. And this is very relevant. Adam mentioned the AlphaGo. That's based on DeepMind. DeepMind was a small company in the UK, or a relatively small company that Google bought. And they basically blew everyone's socks off by taking a bunch of Atari 2600 emulators. They lowered the resolution down really low, so it's just like a few blocks, and fed it to a back-propagating neural network, and it learnt how to play the games with no input from a human. It didn't even really know how to do a score. So it is like better, it's superhuman at Breakout, it's pretty good at Space Invaders, it's horrible at Pac-Man, because it doesn't know that you can eat the power pill and then chase the ghosts. That just never happened in its setup. So it looks like a really, really good player, but it never really got that understanding. But this is what they use to show people. It's like, it's basically putting down a baby in front of something, and it works out how to use it. Except for it's not a baby, it's an anemone. There's no human thought process going on. So in terms of what this might look like in the real world, okay. So say, we're cashed up next year, we've got a lot of money, we want to give away a car at our booth, because that'll be a fantastic idea, but we don't want to waste that car on you peasants. We only want high rollers who are going to buy our stuff. So what we could do is, we've got the badge scanner, so we get the titles and training data for people. We're going to run a raffle. Some people, we know who they are. So we can get some cameras, we can set them up, we can use OpenCV, which is commonly available. We can determine your gender, your overall attire, whether you wear glasses, approximate age, your hair colour, your complexion, OCR branding your clothing to see whether you're from another booth, in which case, sorry, you're out. And then we can use that data as a training set to capture images of unknown entrants, people who we haven't scanned their badge. And then we can basically skew the results, so CISOs from large banks manage to win cars and nobody else does. This is a slightly convoluted example of something you'll see a lot in the real world, actually. The problem is Marco. Marco wears a vest. Very few people here wear a vest. If he's in our training set, and we've only got, like, say, 40 odd bits worth of indicators, and most of them are pretty mixed, some high rollers wear glasses, some, other people wear glasses, but if Marco's the only vest dude that we've got, and we know he's an AusCERT employee, generally speaking, the computer will go, well, everyone wearing a vest is an AusCERT employee, not worth winning. If Adam Cartwright from ANZ decides he wants to go steampunk to a conference, basically we're stuffed. You never know when machine learning is stacking the odds. And we don't know we screwed up because the training data fits. For the data that we provided and checked the model on, it's all perfect. We just don't know what it looks like when it goes to the real world. And if you'd like to see an example of this, if you've got a Mac and a PC, check some airline prices with US airlines and see what you get. If you use a Mac, you'll probably get about a 10% more expensive price, but you might get more flight availability and vice versa. And not just change your user agent, they will look at elements of your browser DOM. It's done all the time, working out what is the price the market will bear based on characteristics of you without you even knowing about it. Actual people, this stuff is pretty cool. Labelled faces in the wild, it's a bunch of photos of actual humans, largely from the media. It's not controlled in terms of lighting. Some of it's under flash, some of it's half in the dark, some of it they're obscuring their face while they're carrying their child in from the car while paparazzi chase them. It's 5,753 effectively famous people, a few pictures of each. It's not super representative of our society, but not awful. People with a very dark complexion, the NBA and the NFL players that appear in newspapers, they're helped. People from South Asia definitely drew a short straw. There's about 5 or 6 people with sort of South Asian appearance. A lot of African and Chinese ethnic groups are not represented at all. And it's not a social justice warrior thing. This is not about representation. This is about the fact that the tech regards these people as an outlier because they don't have characteristic A, B, C, or D that it's learnt to look for. Maybe they get less ads. Maybe it's really good that the flying under the radar of the machines. But it's not good that we live in a society where this can happen. We tend to test on ourselves. I know, Oddie, when I first started doing AI effectively back in 2001 with Spam Assassin, I'd take my inbox and a bunch of spam, and I'd use that to train Spam Assassin. I think if anyone is a sysadmin, you've probably gone through the same thing. You can't just take random people's mailboxes and chuck it in your tools. So Spam Assassin, which is effectively a Bayesian network of sorts, it learnt that what I receive is normal, and it learnt what spam is. I still remember having a secretary, every time she sent something about printer toners, they'd always get put in the spam bin, because I don't send email about printer toner, spammers do. So we have to be very wary when we use ourselves as the example set. We can really inadvertently cause harm. In terms of feeding the beast, so it's a problem when you've got a small data set, right? That is no longer a problem for a lot of large global companies. You'll have many inputs from cameras, Fitbits, messages on your phone. The time you spend not scrolling will indicate that you're interested in an article on Facebook. Whether you hover a mouse over something and don't click it, that's like almost their sale. If you'd like a free trial of anything, hover over the buy button and then move away and do it a couple of days in a row, you'll almost certainly get yourself a free trial. Thanks, LinkedIn, that's great. Hundreds of data points coming in from phones. Companies like Millennial Media have APIs in their ad network that let you record the sound that is near the phone when the ad is playing and send that back to them as text so they can target you even better. Unclear whether anyone uses it, but the functionality is provided. Good data is hard to find unless you're experimenting on your own users. So you are, the training set for the people who are effectively innovating in AI. Peter Norvig from Google, they wrote a paper called The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Data, basically saying you don't have to be really smart and get a good model. If you can just throw enough data at it, the problem will sort itself out. And axiomatically, the line of best fit works better if you've got more lines to fit between. A lot of the academic work on this stuff is pretty poor. A lot of the private stuff and advertising networks is really, really good. I think, we could have solved multiple kinds of cancer by now if all of these smart machine learning people were actually working on medical problems, not, how to make you buy herbal Viagra. In terms of what people are worried about, Terminator is the standout AI threat. Every news story AI mentions it. There's always an Arnie here or a Skynet there. Most people seem to conflate robots, drones, and AI. So I refer to machine learning as AI, but really it's a moving target. For a long time, chess was the gold standard. Once chess could beat, a lot of people in the room remember Deep Blue. So when the computer beat Kasparov, it's like, yes, we're there. The dawn of the machines is here. They're smarter than us. And then everyone went, actually, it's not intelligence. We thought it was going to be, but it turns out just like trying a lot of options works really good too. So we constantly move the bar of what artificial intelligence is basically to just ahead of what we've found out right now. Chess is a pretty easy problem. It turns out, just like basically trying a lot of things and then excluding them is a lot better than spending 10 years playing in a park or watching a lot of professional games. Boston Dynamics, they are owned by Alphabet. We see this guy here. This is Atlas. So Atlas looks like a person. He's really just an expert machine at walking and staying upright. If you've seen the swearing robot viral video going around YouTube, you see he's not always an expert at staying upright either. But he was used in a DARPA search and rescue challenge, which was pretty cool. Like you can go into a building and rescue a person. It was also like opening a doorknob, cutting a hole in a wall, that sort of stuff. They did really well, and to put it bluntly, people lost their shit. People saw that Google, the parent company, had built what looks like a worker who doesn't stop for smokos or coffee breaks, doesn't complain, and then went, that robot is going to replace me. That bipedal robot is, going to take my job. As a result, they decided that they wanted to sell Boston Dynamics. In a somewhat tone-deaf way. The whole robot initiative at Alphabet, the Google parent company, is called Replicant. It's not like they didn't think of it. There's a bit of a theme through this talk, like tone deafness, like talk to your marketing people before you think of a clever name for your AI project, people. Jeez. Courtney Horn from Alphabet was quoted as saying in a leaked email, "We're not going to comment on this video because there's really not a lot we can add and we don't want to answer most of the questions it triggers." So, military AI is scary. This is Tyrannus. It is named after the Celtic god of lightning. It's a unmanned aerial vehicle by BAE Systems. I'm probably sure there's probably some BAE people in the room. Hi guys. It's a scary bit of tech. The saving grace and the thing they always point out is that a human pulls the trigger. So it flies where it wants, it gets all the telemetry, but a human has to go, yep, clicks the button from wherever they are in the US. Predator drones at the moment, conversely, are effectively remote controlled like a computer game by a guy in a crappy office somewhere. This is supervised, but there's a lot more potential for mistake because it is going to be flying itself and effectively conduct parts of missions on its own. Speaking of tone deaf, Skynet. If I remove the slide, if you currently have a US clearance and you need to worry about, if you just like to block your ears and hum Star Spangled Banner while I've got this slide up, then you're fine. Basically, NSA's Skynet project, once again, tone deaf as all hell, they use 55 million cell phone sets of data for people who had not left Afghanistan and Pakistan during a time period. They took 80 features, so 80 different data sets, but 7 people they had identified as terrorist couriers. So 55 million phones, 7 phones belonging to bad dudes, and they decided that they wanted to do effectively a random forest to try and work out how they could find the terrorists. They took 100,000 just random people from Pakistan and Afghanistan to mix in the list, so chances are if you never left Karachi, you're probably pretty cool when you're in that data set. Anyone who travels vaguely between regions, you're probably pretty much stuffed. They thought they could get as low as a 0.18% error rate, which is pretty good, but it involves missing 50% of the terrorists, and you end up with somewhere around, I think, 15,000 falsely identified people. So for a 50% hit rate, you get 15,000 people you're willing to, bomb from the air. Including in their slides that were leaked, they also included an Al Jazeera station chief. Those unfamiliar, they are a reasonably independent news source in the region. They flagged this guy as a member of Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood, 2 groups that don't really get along super well, so there's some people issues here too. We only see the deck, we don't see the talk, there could have been other things, but what you should take from this is, the NSA are really smart people. If anyone who's saying bad things about them, it's not that they're dumb. If the smart people at the NSA are doing this stuff, can you imagine what your dev teams are doing to support your marketing efforts? And by the way, the actual Skynet that they're working on is called Monster Mind. It's effectively an AI that can launch cyber war and retaliation. So sort of like the movie War Games, but with DDoS. So they've done that too. Good work, guys. Asymmetry is going to be a real problem. When they start bringing these things to war zones, people start getting ideas about that. Like IEDs suck for American or for friendly forces, friendly forces. Drone tech is going to suck a lot more. There's about $1 in parts to turn an off-the-shelf drone into a flying bomb. Rudimentary AI and those things, when they're introduced, will mean there's no signals to block for people. And you don't need someone supervising something to go, that looks like a US transport kaboom. We're introducing technology and concepts into a war zone that advantage the enemy more than us, potentially. Anyway. This is what people should really be worried about, by the way, not bipedal drones. In my view, self-driving cars are just a stalking horse. The European, and by the way, this is Euro Truck Simulator. Funnily enough, people have started driving trucks in real time for fun at the same time that computers have started driving real trucks. It's a lot like, watching My Kitchen Rules while ordering away from Menulog. It's a bit of a funny setup. But there's a European truck platooning challenge that happened earlier this year. They did 2,000 kilometres across 4 borders in Europe, and they drive like the peloton in a cycling race. They sort of slipstream behind each other, so they save a lot of fuel. It's pretty cool. Humans can't really do it. In theory, it's safer, but the problem is we have 275,000 truck drivers in Australia. And that's just the truck drivers, not all of the small towns and the cafes and petrol stations and everything that supports them. So that's probably about 4% of the Australian population is involved in the trucking industry. And a lot of those people are going to be displaced by automated trucks in all likelihood. We could say that they'll legislate against it, but we legislate against Uber, and how well is that working? Understanding language is a really interesting one. This is, those screenshots are from the cleverly titled Parsey McParsface from Google. The actual engine's called SyntaxNet, but Parsey McParsface is just a really good way. It's a jump in accuracy in terms of breaking down language. But in terms of the two examples there, the one on the left is correct, saying that, Alice drove down the road in her car. The one on the right, which is the way another model did it, was Alice drove down the road in her car. Why she has a road in her car, nobody knows, but English is really hard. Other languages are maybe a little bit easier, but not by much. So the ability to break down language is really important, but a lot of the stuff that we see isn't great. Exhibit A, Tay. Microsoft did a lot of favours in terms of being scared of AI here. They hyped it real hard ahead of Build 2016. They went to Twitter to be able to go, woo, check out this, it's awesome. And then, yes, people getting it to say, the 13 words of the Aryan Brotherhood and so on, and she happily repeated them back and learnt from them, what's worse, to use some of these parts of these phrases elsewhere. And then they still went and announced it as a product at Build 2016, so it shows how dedicated they are to this direction. They actually had a team of human supervisors. What they were doing at the time that it was tweeting this stuff, I don't know. They also accidentally sent it live again for a couple of hours. Like someone went, oh, the process has stopped, started again, and I don't know. Hard to say. Tay doesn't know what words mean. It sort of breaks them down like a grade 6 English assignment as seen previously. Whose noun do you want a verb? And then it goes and sort of finds related terms and parrots it back. It doesn't understand anything. Yeah, a lot of basically, these are some of the least offensive things that people got it to say. This one was interesting because this wasn't actually someone saying repeat after me. It's just like, I learned from the best, if you don't let me spell out for you, I learned from you and you're dumb too. That could have been the improv team that they got doing some writing for it, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't. Yeah, I also tried the summarize tool on Skype, one of IBM's other things. It just basically gave me some dot points about paragraphs. It was no good. Something that they said regarding Tay is, we were probably over-focused on thinking about some of the technical challenges, and a lot of this is a social challenge. We feel terrible that so many people were offended, which is, yeah, as long as they learn, that's all right. This is a small test I did of the Watson's dialogue service. I would be dead right now if I was allergic to olives. It didn't even parse a negation, which is a bit of a shame. Oh, and just for the general people in security here, don't put your demos out with cross-site scripting vulnerabilities in them, please. I really should report this to IBM, but they should have really figured it out. So if anyone's currently if anyone's at IBM, report it back. But yeah, cross-site scripting exploits all through all of their demo code. It's not production ready. But anyway, Oz the Great and Powerful. What a lot of the best performing AI that you're seeing coming out of Silicon Valley is just a bunch of minimum wage workers. There's a lot of people hiding behind the curtains whose job it is to answer in a very uniform and robotic fashion. There's already been a few examples where companies have been taken to court because they use their actual humans to produce a very large training set of how to answer basic questions. Like, I think, 80-20 rule. Most of the questions are like, what is the weather like in Seattle? Not complicated stuff. So they got a corpus of all of this from their low-paid employees, and then, they come to work on Monday and their pass doesn't work. Because they've effectively been replaced by the robot that they were hired without knowing about it to train. Same as people love Siri, but there's not a lot going on under the hood here. In terms of e-health is a really interesting field for machine learning. The British National Health Service gives 1.6 million people's health data from 3 London hospitals to Google's DeepMind people. The patient consent is currently unclear from everything I've read. Watson is trying to find cancer, which is pretty damn cool, but they are currently buying up. You'll notice they're buying less tech companies, or less infosec companies at the moment, because we're no longer the new hotness. They're buying a lot of health analytics companies. They currently have the records of 300 million US citizens in terms of their health treatment and medications and outcomes. And that's really good. That can save lives, but there's also, speaking of the Faustian bargain, we're giving inadvertently our governments are giving all of our private health information to private corporations to use to train their AIs. And I certainly couldn't find any material that made it clear who owned the result. Do we go and buy it back from them? Do we rock up to, Dr. Watson and pay us $75 for him to diagnose us? It's really not clear how that's going to happen. And, if all of our corporate history has been any example, chances are, we'll give them all the information and then we'll pay for it back again. Cybersecurity, that's why you're all here. If you do generic machine learning across all of your security data, you're doomed. Like the NSA in their phone study, it's the false positive paradox. If your error rate is higher than your actual incidence rate in your data, you can't win. Anyone who tells you can is just, if you believe what's on a fly by someone who says with no training they can find all of your bad stuff and not get rid of good stuff, hit me up, I'll take you to dinner and you can invest in one of my new companies, it'll be great. Even Six Sigma, like we all hear about Six Sigma, it's like that's 3.5 defects per million records. If you're talking like a firewall with AI in it, dropping 3.5% of your connections is pretty bad. Well, sorry, 3.5 connections a day could be pretty bad, or 3.5 hosts, whatever, networks, depending on what you're filtering on. This is something that worried the crap out of me. Our machines should be nothing more than tools for extending the power of the human beings who use them, from Thomas Watson Jr. He was the second president of IBM. His father, Thomas Watson Sr., can be seen just to Hitler's left here. I'm informed that Godwin's law does not apply here because this guy was actually helping the Nazis. I'm not making a metaphor or simile here. He was given the Merit Cross of the German Eagle with Star, which was an award that was invented for him. He returned it in 1940 after the bombing of Paris. It should be noted that pretty much everything about this stuff was written by a journalist by the name of Edwin Black. IBM's attempts to refute his claims are largely either everyone knew that already, shut up, it's not news, or we don't know because all of the records from IBM were destroyed after World War II in that region. It's not great. But it's ultimately besides the point. Like when the gypsies were rounded up, the cards that they used to basically work out whether they'd been processed were pronounced, I'm going to say this wrong, they were stamped Hollerith F-Fast, German for registered by Hollerith, the German IBM licensee. There's certainly, who really knows what happened, but things like Kristallnacht, to have so much coordination to be able to get all of the undesirables and round them up in a very short period of time, if you're doing it by paper records and filing cabinets, it's not going to happen. IBM had delivered some of the very first punch card machines for doing national censuses in the early 1930s to Germany. That's part of, I guess, why he's meeting here with Hitler. And we don't really know how those records were used, but like us solving cool big data problems, you don't really want to be the guy, you don't want your grandkids looking at a picture of you, shaking hands with, Hitler 2.0, whoever that's going to be. It's a technology that allows us to do allows people to do some really, really scary shit. And almost on an unprecedented scale, especially with how much of our lives are digital now. And, we're all optimistic. It's, humans, I think, have a natural hubris around technology. We invented this technology, we can do anything. But, when we look at at Faust and the Sorcerer as Apprentice, are we ready for this? Are we prepared to give up what we're giving up in order to get this technology in some ways? Conversely, we could be looking at a far better future. Like AI can guide crop planting and things like that. It allows you to do independent validating of votes to try and stop dirty elections because you can sort of model what things look like and fix it. There's all sorts of amazing things you can do. I anticipate VR is going to have a very heavy role in this for people who are tactile learners. At the moment, if you can't really absorb information from a blackboard at school, or when it's said to you, you end up having to go and being a tradie or something with your hands because the other professions are sort of cut out from you. Whereas I think once we've got the ability to use this technology, we've got 3D, people can sort of hold the data in their hands. I think it's going to open up a lot of careers to people who are otherwise sort of relegated to working in factories or things like that. Just briefly, I'll finish off. Okay, superintelligence. This stuff's pretty scary. We tend to think in an anthropomorphic scale, so we think about the difference between, some idiot and Einstein, but think like the difference between the intelligence of an ant and Einstein. That's really the sort of situation we're going to be looking at. AI is not going to be like people. We don't even understand how people work. My expectation is that once we invent a computer superintelligence, it will be able to work out the human brain. It's not going to happen the other way around. I don't know, my best hope is that I have a skill that the superintelligence finds entertaining. It'll keep me as a pet. Best option, probably. In terms of what's going to get us there, open source. Open source explosion recently. Facebook, Baidu, and Microsoft are all pitching in. Normally with Google, you get like an open source version of their last gen tech. Now all of their internal teams are moving to the open source stuff they release, which is TensorFlow, which is shown on the graph here. It's really cool stuff. You can just like put some data in, roll your face across the keyboard, and cool stuff comes out. It's very, very smart. You don't have to understand all of the underlying layers. It's like data in, answer out, for better or worse. This consensus stuff is really interesting. UNU, I guess you'd say it, they get a bunch of people and they use artificial intelligence to basically take all of their different answers and learn from it. They won the Superfecta at the Kentucky Derby, which is, I think they got the first 4 horses in order. So like a $5 ticket gets you $25,000. It could be smoke and mirrors like Oz the Great and Powerful earlier, but I don't think so, considering they had journalists in on it. That would have been a good story too. So yeah, it's the ability to use humans and computers together, much like a couple of grandmasters and Fritz chess is far better than any AI when it comes to playing chess. Cooperation works much better. The things we're good at, the things they're good at. Facebook is making an AI that's really good at optimizing and assessing AIs. And they've got a harness for that, but they're also using their AI to train their AI. So, you know, it's like Exhibit, they put an AI in your AI. So, yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. We won't get super intelligence from it, but it's definitely going to be a piece of the puzzle. Like, making an AI that's really good at producing AI will get us there rather than humans iterating over it. And they tune the hell out of it, which is great. I'm running out of time, so I'll go real quick. How to fight machine learning surveillance if you are concerned about after seeing stuff today. Use travel cards and things like that stochastically at random, so your patterns are harder to pick up. Don't use your loyalty cards from stores if you're buying chocolates and cigarettes. They still email me about 1 litre jars of mayonnaise, even though I'm careful what I buy on it and what I don't, so your mileage may vary. You know, cycle your MAC address, turn off your Bluetooth. Most of those, like, smart billboards gather the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth IDs of devices that go near them, so they know how long you stop and look. Industry codes appease the government, but there's no real regulation about this stuff, so it's pretty scary. If you wish to avoid facial recognition, this project is by a guy named Adam Harvey called CV Dazzle. It's a bunch of like really interesting haircuts and face paint that'll avoid stuff. Here's some people who had their own crack at it. I don't know how successful they were. Problem being that, you know, unless there's a Bowie retrospective on that day, you know, you're in trouble. Like, if the AI flags you as being like dressing like Bowie, you're going to stick out. Doesn't matter if it can't identify who you were. For me, the best option is fitting in. Talking about earlier with training data sets, you can exploit overfit by dressing exactly like a doppelganger celebrity. If you look a lot like George W. Bush and you really get your George W. Bush on, that's who you are because it's in the data set. There's a data point for you already. There's Russian find face stuff that's 70% accurate. That's pretty damn cool. But yeah, you're much better to blend in than you are to try and like obscure your face by like, you know, dressing like, you know, one of the guys from Immortal or something. It's a bad deal. In terms of, okay, the too long didn't read. If you've been asleep for the rest of it, here you go. Garbage in, garbage out. Be careful what the data you feed to AI is. Make sure a human checks it. Does it seem sane? You know, does the average human have 1 testicle and 1.1 ovaries? You know, statistics will tell you yes. Any human will tell you no. If you're trained against simulated data, you get a really nice fit that's totally useless because you built an AI that can predict an AI's output. That is super common as well. I don't know how many times I see simulated data being used as evidence for coming up with an answer for something. You are not representative of the world at large. Feed it data about a lot of people, not just you and the people in your immediate office area. Do it early, particularly with the transportation of models. It's going to suck otherwise. The false positive paradox, make sure your error rate is lower than your real actual incidence rate. Be mindful what you share with people. AI is not a scientist. It's not like Ava from Deus Machina. You know, it can't objectively judge things. It doesn't know what's going on. If you can get anything out of this, AI is an army of barely competent lab assistants. If you say, why did you block every transaction after 3 o'clock on a Thursday, it will say to you, that is all you're going to get. It cannot explain, it does not understand, it's just a set of neurons. So yeah, it'll just freak out. There's nothing you can do about that. Ultimately, the revolution is coming. We're going through, I mean, we saw a little bit of this, I guess around the turn of the century, but we are coming into a new industrial revolution. We're seeing manufacturing moving back into America and Australia because you can build an automated plant and have your engineers there. Takes 2 guys to look after a whole warehouse full of robots instead of having a bunch of low-paid workers overseas. So we're having massive displacement. If you're involved in this stuff, in this tech, think less about the tech and more about society. Think holistically. What changes is your company making? You don't want to be on the bad side of this. And there is going to be upheaval. There has to be. So, think about what you're doing. Think about the outcome's going to be. Thank you very much.
Great stuff. I want to thank you, World Emperor Kayne Naughton. I want you to remember my loyalty to you upon your ascension. One quick question. The Google AI thing, and there was that move in Game 3, move 37, where the machine makes this move and the guys watching go, oh, it's stuffed up there. That must be a mistake. They surely should have gone down there. And an hour later they realise, wow, that was a move in this game that wasn't just a great example of what humans normally do. From what I understand, they're claiming just on a tactical level that humans have never reached, right? Are they gilding the lily a little bit there? And is it just a one-off thing that doesn't represent that much? Or is it a breakthrough in a way of thinking about a game that humans have been played for thousands of years?
I believe it's an error that it made. And it was interesting because after seeing it, it really flustered the opponent. I think game 4, he did something weird. And then AlphaGo dropped its bundle. Like when he stopped playing like a professional, the same way they play against chess computers, if you do something abnormal that's outside of its sort of pre-calculated trees, it freaks out too. So, humans can play at that game and making a weird choice.
Fantastic stuff. Give him a round of applause. That was just wonderful. There you go, mate. Take that with you, Kayne. Is that yours?
Yes.
Great.